Welcome back to the Getting Dressed podcast. I'm Anthony Bolognese, and today we are going to be going down the rabbit hole that I just went down about banned fashion. Not banned as in the music, as in legally you are not allowed to wear these things. Now, that's not entirely true in the current day. As far as I'm aware, I don't actually think that there is any illegal way to dress other than, public indecency kind of stuff. But that's a different conversation. Right now, we're going to go down the rabbit hole that I went down, searching for various times in history and various garments or styles that were literally illegal. Now, there are always going to be caveats here. Fully illegal, as in you will be arrested wearing this, is not incredibly common, but, there were citations, there are tickets, and there are just general, societal eyebrow raises about a variety of different styles. So we're going to kind of run the gamut here. Let's start in the 1940s. So if you're not familiar with the term zoot suit, it's basically, at least the way that I kind of grew up understanding it, it was basically like kind of the big, baggy, oversized for the sake of being oversized, like pimp suit almost. I kind of mentally envision it as, bold pinstripe, kind of that like 60s or 70s look with a top hat and a cane and all that kind of stuff. But traditionally, the zoot suit actually kind of originated around World War II. So during that time, clothing was very heavily regulated, just in the sense of making sure that garment manufacturers were not being wasteful with their material. It was kind of seen as un-American and unpatriotic to overuse material for garments. So naturally, all of the uniforms for the military were pretty fitted, and even in the garments that, people that weren't going to war were wearing, it was very, again, traditionally un-American to be wearing something loose and flowy because that used a lot of fabric that could otherwise be used on the, military force. So zoot suits were something that kind of happened in the Western U.S., and they were kind of the style of the, minority groups of the time. So African Americans, Asian Americans, and Mexican Americans primarily. Because there were regulations specifically prohibiting the manufacture of zoot suits, and let me actually literally define the zoot suit. It is not specifically the pimp suit kind of thing. It doesn't have to be purple or crazy pattern or anything like that, but it is just an oversized suit for the sake of being an oversized suit. So very flowy, baggy pants, lots of pleats, oversized shoulders, just a big, big fit overall. And that is in vogue today on the runway and stuff like that, but back then it was kind of a countercultural movement. So since there was regulation prohibiting their manufacture, obviously there's bootlegging that happens in much more than just the alcohol industry. So there were bootleg tailors that made them, and it exacerbated racial tensions. Notably Mexican American, high school, college-aged kids were kind of ostracized and seen as un-American because they were deliberately ignoring the regulations around them and wearing zoot suits as a part of their kind of culture, whether it was counterculture or just normal culture. And long story short, it ended up kind of causing riots. Like the zoot suit riots are something that I did not know about, but you should absolutely look it up. It's wild. But yeah, though it was never explicitly illegal to wear them, it was illegal to manufacture them during World War II. And that is an interesting thing to note. The zoot suit is not something that is incredibly common nowadays, and I do think that there is still some like racial tension potentially around it. One of the top results when you search zoot suits is, can a white person wear a zoot suit? Fashion is always evolutionary. I'm not going to speak to that. I personally don't love the look of them, but I'm also a little bit more of a fashion traditionalist when it comes to suits. Anyway, on to a different regulation. This is something that I think a lot more people are aware of, is bathing suit regulations. And this, again, like most fashion regulations, this is something that kind of was meant to marginalize a specific group of people. So with the zoot suit, it was immigrants and, minority Americans. With bathing suits, it was women. So in the 1900s, there were laws put in place to make sure that people were modest, quote unquote, when it came to the way they dressed. So it was required for women at the beach to wear a long one-piece bathing suit with stockings. Obviously, counterculture is counterculture. There are people who are absolutely going to break these rules and test the limits and kind of start a movement, as it were. Now, I want to back up. Men also had some laws to follow. They weren't allowed to go to the beach or pool without wearing a shirt, specifically in Atlantic City, New Jersey, because they didn't want, quote, didn't want it to look as if there were gorillas on our beaches, according to the lawmakers. But in 1937, that counterculture trend would change. Swim trunks, no shirt, that kind of became the standard from then on. The bikini, which is kind of the more controversial thing other than just general, oh no, ankles. The bikini was actually introduced by a French mechanical engineer in 1946. And they continually rose in popularity and kind of were strong enough of force to combat the tickets and legislation that had previously been upheld. But yeah, modesty laws are going to be a common theme here. Now, it still persists to an extent. The most recent example I was able to find is in 2013 on Myrtle Beach, 4 women were arrested for wearing thong bikinis for indecent exposure. And this kind of thing, I mean, it's the exact same regarding what quote-unquote indecent exposure is. Back in the 20s and 30s, a bikini itself, like even a more modest bikini, was considered indecent, because that's just the standard by then. So as time goes on, and from 2013, even over the past 10, 11 years, indecent has changed. And that's a very subjective thing, but I don't think it's something that necessarily should be legislated for. But that's a slippery slope, and I am not prepared to go down that with you. Or even with myself. I don't give a shit. Wear what you want. Another one specific to women, and I found this one fascinating, especially being based in the DC area. There were rules up until 1993 that prohibited women from wearing pants on the floor of the U.S. Senate, implying that they were required to wear skirts or like dresses or something more quote-unquote feminine. But 1993, that's 2 years before I was born, that women were not allowed to wear pants on the floor of the Senate, which is insane. There's a lot of, other smaller case, not official legislations, just house rules basically for women. Including in 2016, British Airways cabin crew members were finally allowed to wear pants to work. They battled for like 2 years with the airline to add pants to their uniform rather than just skirts or dresses, and they won. So, hey, progress. There are also a few interesting ones regarding shoes. In Carmel, California, you are not allowed to wear high heels with a base of less than a square inch or heels that are more than 2 inches high without a permit. Now, the permit is free, and you don't really get a citation by the police for wearing heels, but legally speaking, it's specifically to protect the city from lawsuits as tree roots push up through the pavement. And, I guess they were getting a lot of lawsuits of people tripping on public property or city-owned property while wearing high heels. So it was just a barrier to kind of protect them. If a lawsuit like that were to come up, then they'd have to prove that they weren't wearing heels, which I'm not entirely sure how they would do that without the whole like street camera thing, but it's weird. In Greece, actually still today, high heels are banned at ancient sites specifically because of the damage they can cause. So it's not necessarily a fashion thing for the sake of marginalizing somebody or anything other than just protecting the surface of these ancient places. Back to marginalization. In 2008, the suburb of Linwood in Chicago banned pants worn so loose they dropped below the waist in a style known as sagging. And this one is pretty right up the middle. This is not something that has really changed all that much, not necessarily in the sense of legislation, but more so in bias and public opinion, and I don't know how to explain it necessarily. But yeah, in 2011, Florida, go figure, passed a bill that required schools to discipline students whose pants sagged low enough to show their underwear. That same year, public buses in Fort Worth, Texas also began turning away passengers wearing sagging pants. And it's still going on. South Carolina lawmakers proposed a bill to outlaw the trend of sagging pants in 2018. And as recently as June 2019, the ban actually was repealed. So there's progress in some areas, and as I'm sure we're all keeping track of ridiculous rules and legislation in Florida specifically, I'm sure there's going to be some interesting stuff there. I'm not going to get into cross-dressing. That's an entirely different thing. I'm sure that there will almost never be an end to that story, and I also have no real input on that. I'm still of the wear what you want category, as long as you're not, actively involving someone else in what you're wearing in a way that is ridiculous. I mean, it's so hard to talk around this without providing like an exact example of something, because everything is so fluid, and I'm talking in circles anyway. But there's a time-honored debate of censorship versus personal expression. And no matter what side of that aisle you fall on, because it is something that is politicized, just like everything else, just keep it to yourself. Don't try to legislate how people are allowed to dress. It's just wrong, regardless. I don't care what political leanings you have. I don't care what, side of any aisle you fall on. But censorship versus expression, there's a fine balance, and it's up to literally every single human being to judge how they feel about any given issue. I don't think that style should be regulated. Just full stop. All right, this one was an absolute wild card, and I commend you if you've come this far, because I've just been rambling about shit that I don't really have a full and comprehensive understanding of. But if you have any other anecdotes or experiences of being like marginalized, or just stories of interesting, style rules and regulations throughout history that have actually been enforced in a legal way, definitely let me know. I might do a follow-up on this if there's enough, interest or enough suggestions of stuff that I missed. Or if you have a specific experience that you think would make a good episode, get in touch. Email info will be following this, and I will talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Getting Dressed Podcast. Check us out on Instagram at Getting Dressed Podcast. Shoot us an email at gettingdressedpodcast@gmail.com, and we would really appreciate it if you were able to leave a rating or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, tell your dog, whatever. See you soon.